Het begint een vervelend verhaal te worden. De moderne mens put de aarde in rap tempo uit. Woestijnen rukken op en water wordt schaars. Het lijkt allemaal uitzichtloos. En elke 12 jaar komen er ook nog eens 1 miljard mensen bij. Als je vanuit de ruimte naar onze planeet kijkt, is de schaal van verwoesting verbijsterend. Maar er is een man die ontdekte hoe we de woestijnen weer kunnen vergroenen en onze planeet weer gezond kunnen maken. We volgen cameraman en ecoloog John Liu, die de oplossing bijna bij toeval tegenkwam en vanaf dat moment de boodschap overal verkondigt. Dit is wat u te wachten staat.
It's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. So if we can rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, why don't we do that?
The world gets more and more complicated all the time, but the solution to fix the major problems of the world's ecosystems remains reasonably simple.
U kijkt naar Tegenlicht. Welkom in uw groene toekomst.
Het begon allemaal in 1995, toen John Liu als gewone cameraman de opdracht kreeg het Lössplateau in China te filmen. Hij zag hoe de lokale bevolking een gebied bijna zo groot als Nederland veranderde van een dorre, uitgeputte woestenij in een grote groene oase. Hij was verbijsterd. Vergroening van woestijnen werd vanaf dat moment zijn levensdoel.
The more I learn about it, the more I become interested in how this might relate to other parts of the world. And it looks like the history of the Chinese in the Lössplateau is not simply about the Chinese. It's about what happens when human beings don't understand how ecosystems function.
Liu gebruikte zijn camera om de bijna bovenmenselijke inspanning van de Chinezen vast te leggen. Hij maakte daar een film over, Hope in a Changing Climate, die hij op internet zette en zo wereldwijd verspreidde.
China's Lössplateau is a region that stretches for 640,000 square kilometers across north-central China. Unspoilt valleys in neighboring Sichuan show us how it might once have looked. It's the sort of natural abundance that is necessary to support an emerging civilization. How could a landscape with such potential have been reduced to this? When Chinese scientists and civil engineers began to survey the area, they realized that several thousand years of agricultural exploitation had denuded the hills and valleys of vegetation. The relentless grazing of domestic animals on the slopes meant that there was no chance for young trees and shrubs to grow. The rainfall no longer seeped into the earth, but simply washed down the hillsides, taking the soil with it. Over millennia, this progressively destroyed the region's fertility. When this happens over an area as extensive as the plateau, millions of tons of silt are swept down into the Yellow River, which gets its name from the color of the fine, loose soil. The mounting quantities of silt clog up the river, impeding its flow, contributing to the floods that give the river another name, China's Sorrow. In some areas, creating floating mud mattresses that attract passing tourists. A local problem becomes a national problem. In the dry season, the light, unprotected soil is swept up in the winds, causing the dust storms that are blown over China's cities and beyond its borders.
De Chinezen hebben het probleem inmiddels opgelost. De manier waarop ze dat gedaan hebben, is John Liu's missie geworden.
The first and probably one of the most impressive of those findings from the Lössplateau is it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. So if we can rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, why don't we do that?
Sindsdien wordt Liu over de hele wereld uitgenodigd om regeringsleiders, beleidsmakers en dorpelingen met zijn kennis en ervaring bij te staan. Wij volgen hem in Jordanië, waar de woestijn oprukt en het water schaarser wordt. Hij is hier op uitnodiging van de Jordaanse koninklijke familie. Prinses Basma bint Ali wil de verwoestijning van Jordanië stoppen en heeft in Liu een bondgenoot gevonden.
Welcome to the Botanic Garden.
Thanks very much.
I'm glad you were able to make it today.
We'd like to look around and learn as much as we can about the Botanic Garden, and also to learn how the concept of this fits into a larger thought about restoration for the whole country.
I mean, he is someone that is well known. I'm very impressed by the work that he's done and the amount of influence he's been able to have on governments, for example, Rwanda, and that's something we can learn from and benefit from. And if we can do just 1% of what he's done there, here, that would be amazing. And I keep on saying natives, 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 because they're the ones who are well adapted to our area with the encroaching climate change and desertification. We really need to rely on our native plants. As you can see now, we're not a classical botanic garden of the colonial era or relics of the colonial era, but we're trying to teach everyone, regardless if they're in Jordan or otherwise, that you can very easily restore an area which was degraded.
Well, this was the land of milk and honey. This was the promised land. These are the places where historically people have done agriculture and done animal husbandry for thousands of years. But the lands are exhausted. They allow hundreds and thousands of sheep and goats to walk across here, and any green thing that sticks up its head is food. And they're just walking around here getting everything. Well, you can't let them do that anymore. They'll have to stop. They've been doing that since thousands of years, and that's what's destroyed this area. So if that doesn't stop, you won't be able to fix this.
The way we've done it is we excluded grazing for the first 3 years, and that worked out very well. And in that 3 years, this is when we discovered the species that came up on its own, which were thought to be extinct and was last recorded in the 1800s. It just came up on its own. So we allowed the land to breathe, to take a breath, and to see what's going on. We didn't interfere, we didn't do any planting at the time, just to see how it reacts, and that gave us a lot of feedback of how we can deal with or how to rehabilitate areas. So it was very efficient for us. And as you can see here, it's very overgrazed, it's very barren. This is outside our borders, and then within here you can see the difference.
Just by making a fence around this place, you'll get back grasses. That's what's so extraordinary. Now, when you get back grasses, that means each year, first of all, you have perennial root systems, and they'll spread out. And you'll have microbial communities living and growing in this microclimate that's created. So then you won't have direct sunlight hitting. You won't have UV radiation irradiating and sterilizing this microbiologic habitat. So everything will change. Then you're in an accumulative situation. Now you're in a disaccumulative situation where there's always less vegetation, always less organic matter, always less biodiversity. That's exactly wrong. We need to shift that to always more organic matter, always more biomass, always more biodiversity.
I cannot stand and watch our land be degraded and ignorant people abusing it. It's my duty to take a stand to make things better. And I've carved out my world and the environment. Other members of the families have taken on various different topics, but this is my little niche.
So now it's been really a long time since I began, and so I'm far down the path. And I think if you go down this path and you start to look and you say, well, that's an interesting phenomenon, you can see the relationship between hydrology and vegetation and biological life. And you realize that, well, actually that's the basis of the air and the natural water system. And it's how the atmosphere and the hydrological cycle were created and how they were constantly renewed. And then you come to places like this, which are massively degraded, and you realize that people aren't thinking about this ecological function. They're ignoring the science that we know about this. And they're believing that what's important is to produce something. But actually, that's not what's the most important thing right now. The most important thing for survival and sustainability for humanity is that places, not just individual places, but the entire planet is functional. If we understand how the natural evolutionary processes work, and we emulate those, and we don't disturb those by our behaviors, we can live in the Garden of Eden.
Nog een voorbeeld uit Liu's film Hope in the Changing Climate is Ethiopië. Ook daar ging hij met zijn camera op onderzoek uit. In Ethiopië is meer dan waar ook te zien hoe kwetsbaar de mens is voor milieurampen. De problemen van dit land worden door oorlogen en interne conflicten alsmaar groter. En nu lijkt de door de mens veroorzaakte klimaatverandering de ellende nog te vergroten. Net als op het Lössplateau is hier door eeuwenlange landbouw bijna alle natuurlijke begroeiing verdwenen. De droge ravijnen zijn getekend door zware overstromingen.
These gullies are evidence of the enormous power of runoff during the rainy season. Without vegetation cover on the hillsides, when the rains come, the water doesn't soak into the ground but flows away in a flood. Then it's not available for agriculture during the rest of the year. This leads to drought and, famously for Ethiopia, famine. But just as I've witnessed in China, there is hope that the situation here can be reversed.
Yeah, that root could survive? No.
In just 6 years, Professor Legessa Nagash and local villagers have transformed a severely eroded terrain by planting indigenous trees and plants. Almost miraculously, a clear flowing stream has emerged where once there was a muddy trickle.
How is it that it's possible for you to get the stream to flow throughout the year?
It is because of the vegetation cover, which has been regenerating on this mountain. This water is maintaining the landscape because as soon as rain falls on the canopy on this vegetation, That rain then infiltrated gradually into the ground, ending up with this steady flow of this river. Water is life. Without water, nobody can do anything. I'm amazed, as short as 5 years, 6 years, you get clean water like this, provided you work hard for restoring this degraded landscape.
Now, when you get on a process of restoration, you can see that the next generations will have much better lives. So they'll be able to participate in a much richer social life. They'll have different cultural changes. They'll have increased wealth. They'll have better diet and health care and educational opportunities. Everything will be different.
Ook op het enorme Lössplateau had Liu al gemerkt hoeveel overtuigingskracht er nodig is. Daar moesten 2,5 miljoen mensen begrijpen dat het voorlopig beter was om hun vee binnen te houden en hun land niet optimaal te gebruiken. Om de natuur even de ruimte te geven. Maar hoe vertel je dit de lokale bevolking, die afhankelijk is van de dieren en de producten van het land?
What eventually convinced the local people was the assurance that they would have tenure of their land, that they would directly benefit from the effort they invested in the new project.
我们的这个做法就是，这个规划就是山上戴帽子，山腰紧带着，沟底穿靴子。山上戴帽子就是山上全部都种草。这个摇铃子的就是推农田。沟底穿靴子就是打坝。 拦住土壤废物起来，能够恢复起来，这个经济能够发展，人民能够生活很好。
Hills and gullies were designated as ecological zones to be protected. Farmers were given financial compensation for not farming on them and keeping their livestock penned up. When I first filmed Mr. Ta Fuyuan and his colleagues back in 1995, I had no idea this initiative could achieve such dramatic results. If we were to restore the vast areas of the planet where we humans have degraded the soils, just think what an impact we would have in taking carbon out of the atmosphere. As much as 1/4 of the world's land mass has been degraded, and much could be rehabilitated in the way we have seen on the Lössplateau. And we've only just begun to recognize the real value of natural capital. Surely investing in the recovery of damaged environments is a cost-effective way of solving many of the problems we face today.
The source of wealth is the functional ecosystems. The products and services that we derive from those are derivatives. It's impossible for the derivatives to be more valuable than the source. And yet, in our economy now, as it stands, the products and services have monetary values. But the source, the functional ecosystems, are zero. So this cannot be true. It's false. So we've created a global institution of economic institutions, an economic theory, based on a flaw in logic. So if we carry that flaw in logic from generation to generation, we compound the mistake.
Op het Lössplateau hebben ze deze boodschap begrepen. In heel China is het leven van 20 miljoen mensen direct verbeterd door de lessen van het Lössplateau toe te passen.
The changes are not simply on the hillsides. On the plains you can see greenhouses that are filled with vegetables. This extends the growing season. It's very high value produce.
The abundance and variety of new produce can be seen in the local markets. Follow-up studies have shown that incomes have risen threefold.
Wealth is being happy, living in nature, listening to the birds, breathing clean air, not having chemical pollution throughout everything, not having these horrible problems. So, you know, we need to redefine and revalue our belief systems. We need to understand that money is a belief system. There's nothing wrong with money, it turns out. The problem is that what is money based on? If money is based on functional ecosystems, then the future will be beautiful. If money continues to be based on production and consumption of goods and services, we'll turn everything into a desert. What is the future for our children and our children's children and generations to come in the future? If we continue the way we're going, then we're going to reach a crisis point where it's impossible to feed everyone. And at that point, then all bets will be off, because you'll have millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people who are migrating to survive. Now, if you're in the first world and you think, well, that's okay, it's not me, it's them. Well, this isn't going to save you. You can't shoot them down. There are too many. There's 7 billion people on the earth, and we're adding 1 billion people every 12 years. It's not going to be possible to suppress humanity when they can't survive. They won't go gently into that good night.